Story 1. I took the job out of desperation, not out of any special devotion to nursing. Tuition deadlines loomed, and the ad promised free room and board in addition to a salary, an impossible offer to refuse. I moved into Mr. Whitby's Victorian home, at the end of January, hauling my books and cheap suitcase into a place that smelled like dust and old varnish. From the outside, the house looked like an artifact of a forgotten era. Inside, it was a maze, narrow hallways, hidden closets, and a grand staircase that led to a shadowy second floor. My patient, Mr. Whitby, was a proud man who insisted he didn't need much help. I mostly handled his medication, made simple meals, and kept him company during the long nights. He refused to move to an assisted living facility, so I was there to make sure he was safe. The house was large, but we only used a few rooms. Stayed in a cramped attic bedroom. Its single window faced a weathered oak tree in the backyard, and at night, the branches scratched the glass whenever a breeze rolled through. On my third night, something happened that I almost managed to dismiss. Around 2 a.m, I was reading a pathology textbook by flashlight when I heard a gentle creak in the hallway. At first, I assumed it was Mr. Whitby heading to the bathroom. He was known to be restless. I peered out my door, expecting to see his hunched silhouette. No one was there. The corridor yawned into empty darkness, a swirl of stale air and dusty wallpaper. I wasn't frightened exactly, but my heart thumped against my ribs in a way I couldn't ignore. I reminded myself this was an old house. Every board or pipe had its own voice. Still, I locked my bedroom door and didn't sleep until near dawn. When I mentioned the noise over breakfast, Mr. Whitby gave a dismissive snort. "You'd hear all kinds of sounds in a place this old," he said, popping a pill into his mouth and swigging lukewarm tea. "Walls expand, floors settle. Don't let it rattle you." But the noises persisted. Footsteps in places where no one walked. The slow, methodical clunk of a doorknob turning at odd hours, with no door opening afterward. I tried to focus on schoolwork and not let paranoia consume me. Yet each night, the tension grew. One evening, while Mr. Whitby dozed in his armchair, I decided to do laundry in the basement. I descended the tight, rickety steps, carrying a hamper on my hip. The light was feeble, just a flickering bulb overhead. As I approached the washing machine, I nearly dropped the clothes when I glimpsed a shape in my peripheral vision. A figure in the corner, tall but half in shadow. I spun around with a gasp, heart hammering. No one was there. The air was stale, but it felt somehow freshly disturbed, as though someone had just turned to avoid my gaze. I forced myself to keep going. The washer banged and sloshed. Over the noise, I heard the basement door squeak. My nerve endings lit up. Mr. Whitby couldn't manage the stairs alone. I hurried up to check, but found only the door half open, swirling a slight breeze. I convinced myself that I must have left it ajar. A few days later, I found a broken window latch in the first-floor study, the metal twisted as though it had been forced. My mind conjured visions of an intruder. Yet Mr. Whitby insisted it was merely old hardware snapping off. "Call a handyman, if it bothers you," he grumbled. "I've lived here 40 years and never had a break-in." That same night, something jolted me awake. I couldn't say what at first, only that an unsettling pressure weighed on my chest. Then I heard it again, the soft thud of footsteps directly above my room. But the attic had no space above it. My ceiling was the roof. How could anyone walk? There, I crept out of bed in my pajamas, adrenaline singing in my veins. I grabbed the heaviest item I could find, a steel flashlight, and pressed my ear to the door. Silence. I waited, uncertain if I truly wanted to open it. Then came a muffled drag, as if a piece of furniture was being scraped across a surface, just behind the walls. This was enough. I decided to wake Mr. Whitby and call the police. With careful steps, I made my way down the creaking stairs. But when I reached the landing, I froze. The door to Mr. Whitby's bedroom was wide open, and I saw him standing there in his pajamas, transfixed by something in the dim hallway across from him. A figure stood by an antique mirror at the far end of the corridor. For a split second, our eyes seemed to meet. Then the figure turned and vanished into the dark, silent as a ghost. Mr. Whitby pressed a trembling hand to his chest, struggling for composure. He managed to whisper, "There's someone in the house." We retreated to his bedroom and locked the door. My pulse thrummed as I dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady. The dispatcher asked for the address, told us to remain calm. She promised an officer would arrive soon. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Mr. Whitby sat propped on the bed, haggard. My flashlight beam jittered along the walls. I heard the scrape again, this time above the ceiling. It moved slowly, as though the person was shifting back and forth. We turned off the lights, hoping to mask our exact location. Finally, headlights flickered through the curtains, flashing red and blue. A heavy knock on the front door followed. I raced to open it, relief flooding me. 2 officers stepped inside, their flashlights dancing along the walls, scanning each corner. They checked the basement and the first floor, found no sign of forced entry beyond the broken latch we already knew about. Then one officer discovered something in the kitchen. A tangle of footprints on the dusty floor near the pantry. Footprints too large to be mine, definitely not Mr. Whitby's. A second set overlapped, also big. Possibly more than one intruder. They continued the search, climbing to the attic. Their murmurs echoed above us. When they returned, they wore stoic expressions. One officer informed us, in a hushed tone, that there was evidence someone had been living in a narrow crawl space off the attic, old blankets, crumpled food wrappers, and what looked like a crude vent leading out onto the roof. The intruder must have heard the sirens and escaped over the shingles. Mr. Whitby stared down at his hands. I tried to keep my voice even as I told the police everything we knew. They promised to patrol the neighborhood throughout the night. But even after they left, every gust of wind, every settling beam in the old house made me jump. We barely slept until sunrise. I moved out the next day, packing my sparse belongings by daylight. Mr. Whitby pleaded with me to stay. He said he needed someone he could trust. But I couldn't. Not after seeing that outline of a person in the upstairs corridor. Not after hearing the slow scrape in the dead of night. My obligations to him and to my own future seemed secondary to the dread coursing through my veins. In the end, Mr. Whitby hired professional security. I heard he installed cameras and repaired every broken latch. I never visited him again. Sometimes, though, I picture those footprints on the dusty floor or the stash of blankets in the attic. I imagine what it must have been like for that intruder. Those intruders. To slink down corridors while we slept, to stand outside my bedroom door. And every time, a chill grips me. It could have been so much worse. We both survived, yes, but the memory of that shared gaze in the hallway still keeps me awake long after midnight. Story 2. Business travel had never appealed to me, especially not on a budget airline with cramped seats and limited carry-on space. But the firm I was interviewing with insisted I come to their city in person. I arrived at baggage claim in a blur of nerves, juggling a tote bag stuffed with resumes and notes. My flight was late, so I yanked the first black roller bag I recognized from the carousel and dashed off to catch a rideshare to the motel where I'd booked a room for the night. It wasn't until I got to my room, a sad little space with yellowed walls and a single flickering lamp, that I realized the bag wasn't mine. At first it felt like a minor inconvenience. People mix up luggage all the time. I figured I'd find the owner's contact info and fix the situation in the morning. But then I opened the suitcase. I expected clothes, maybe a toiletry bag. Instead, I found small objects that made my skin prickle. Polaroid snapshots of random people grocery shopping, waiting for buses, entering their homes. I flipped through them, confusion mounting. Some images were circled with pen markings, as if the photographer had fixated on certain individuals. Under the photos, I discovered a stack of missing person flyers, each featuring different faces. Many had been cut up. Only fragments of names remained. I couldn't breathe for a long moment. This was not simply the bag of an odd hobbyist. The entire thing felt deeply wrong. My hands trembled as I tucked the photos back and zipped the suitcase shut, distancing myself from it as though it carried a disease. That night, I barely slept. I kept turning the pieces over in my mind, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. When morning came, I decided to call the airline, hoping they could help me contact the rightful owner. While I waited on hold, a call from an unknown number lit up my screen. I answered out of reflex. A man's voice came through, low and tense. "Did you take a black suitcase with a red tag at baggage claim last night?" My mouth went dry. I asked who was calling, but he avoided the question. "You have my bag," he said. "I want it back. We can meet near the airport." His tone set every nerve on edge. I asked how he got my number, and he only repeated his demand. He named a coffee shop in the arrivals area, told me to be there within an hour. Before I could argue, the line cut. Something about his urgent hostility made me fearful. But I also wanted this suitcase out of my life. Every second with it felt like I was complicit in something awful. Against my better judgment, I went to the airport coffee shop. A few travelers were scattered at tables, glued to their phones. I waited 10 minutes, 15. Then someone brushed past me, close enough that I could smell stale sweat and faint cologne. A tall man in a dark hoodie murmured, "You brought it?" He hardly looked at me, as though he worried someone might see us talking. I opened my mouth to speak, but the memory of those photos paralyzed me. The man flicked his gaze to the suitcase by my feet. Before I could pass it over, 2 uniformed security guards strode by, scanning the area. The man stiffened, yanked his hood down lower, and hastily backed away. He disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing there, suitcase handle clutched in my sweaty palm. I left the airport, heart pounding, not sure where to go next. As I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed again, same unknown caller. This time I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. At the motel, I barricaded myself inside. After a moment's hesitation, I forced myself to open the suitcase for a thorough look, hoping to find a name or address. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. More snapshots, some showing people asleep in their beds, the photos clearly taken through windows, a few receipts, a battered notebook full of half-legible handwriting, times, locations, and cryptic notes like locks front door at 10 p.m. or park at 4 a.m. Then, hidden in a side pocket, I found a ring. Not a cheap one either. Silver with an inscription partially filed off. My stomach churned. This was evidence. Something about it all screamed that whoever owned this bag was dangerous. I dialed the police, intending to report the entire thing, but the notion of them thinking I was involved made my hands shake. I stayed on hold for ages. When I finally got through, they recommended I come in to make a statement. But just as I was about to agree, I heard a tapping at my motel room door. My lungs seized. The door rattled slightly, then fell quiet. I whispered into the phone that someone was outside, asked them to send a patrol car. As I backed away, a piece of paper slid under the door. I could see the edge of a shoe vanish from the hallway. With trembling hands, I picked up the paper. It read, "Give me the suitcase or you'll regret it." No name, no signature. When the patrol car arrived, I hurried out to meet them, luggage in tow. The room next door stood open, vacant. Whoever had threatened me was gone. An officer jotted notes while eyeing me with careful skepticism. They suggested I hand the suitcase over as lost property, but also quietly warned that I might need to stay in town until the situation was resolved. I gave them everything, from the photos to the ring. They bagged the items as evidence. The officer promised they'd investigate. I stayed in a different motel that night, not trusting anyone. My phone kept vibrating with unknown calls, but I ignored them. When I dared to step outside for a vending machine snack, I noticed a black sedan idling in the corner of the parking lot. Its headlights were off, but I felt sure someone sat inside, watching. Sometime after midnight, the front desk buzzed my room phone. A guest was asking for me by name. My heart pounded with such force it hurt. I told them I didn't know the person, asked them not to transfer any calls. Then I heard a muffled click. The line went dead. I braced the flimsy chair under the doorknob, terrified that the next sound would be footsteps outside. But the hallway remained eerily silent. Somehow, I fell into a restless doze around 3 a.m. By dawn, I was packed and out the door, heading straight to the airport. I booked the earliest flight back home, no matter the cost. The job interview be damned. I made it onto my plane, anxiously scanning every row of seats. No sign of the hooded man. My phone was off. I had no carry-on beyond my personal bag, and I refused to check any luggage. As the plane took off, I stared at the seat in front of me, mind racing with what might happen next. Would the police connect that ring to a missing person? Would they ever track down the man? Or worse, would he track me down? 2 days later, I received a call from a detective who said they'd found evidence linking the suitcase's contents to multiple stalking incidents and a missing person case. She asked if I could come back to provide an official statement in person. I nearly hung up in panic. Just hearing it said out loud confirmed my worst fears. I'm not sure which unsettles me more, the idea of the police never catching the owner of that suitcase, or the possibility that they will, and I might have, to face him in court. At night, I still dream about those snapshots. Ordinary people going about their lives, unaware that someone was cataloging their every movement. Sometimes I wonder, if I hadn't realized I grabbed the wrong suitcase, might I have ended up in one of those photos too? Story 3. The day I accepted the second job, I felt a twinge of relief. 2 incomes meant I could pay off the credit card bills faster. My boss at the tax prep office insisted someone had to finish the backlog after hours, and no one else volunteered. I took the midnight shift without hesitation, telling myself it was temporary. The strip mall was pitiful even during the day, a cheap nail salon on one end, a payday loan place on the other, and my cramped office wedged between them. At night, the parking lot turned into a gray wasteland, lit by a handful of flickering lampposts. Most storefronts had long been abandoned, metal grates pulled down over shattered glass. Occasionally, bored security guards would do a drive-by, but otherwise, I was alone. That Tuesday, I had a stack of IRS forms to process. I got caught up in verifying IDs, scanning receipts, and cross-checking data. Time slipped away. The clock read 12:30 a.m. when I heard a muffled voice outside. It startled me. Clients never came that late, especially not unannounced. I peered through the glass door, noticing a man standing near one of the lampposts. He wore a wrinkled button-up shirt and looked agitated, pacing in circles. Part of me wanted to ignore him, but something about his frantic gestures set me on edge. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open. "I'm locked out of my car," he said, voice trembling with frustration. He pointed to an old sedan parked a few spaces over. "Do you have a coat hanger or something I can use?" I told him no, apologized, offered to call him a tow truck or locksmith. But he shook his head. "They cost too much," he muttered. "I just need a hand." An uneasy feeling grew in my chest. His gaze roamed behind me, taking in the office's interior. Then he asked if he could come in to wait, maybe use the restroom. I was alone, no one else around. The restrooms Out of order, I lied. I'm sorry. He pressed a little too hard, stepping closer. Just a minute, I swear. A swirl of alarm tightened my limbs. I told him I was busy, that I had to work. He lingered, staring at me as if measuring my reluctance. Then he gave a curt nod and wandered back toward his car. I locked the door, the second it shut. Through the glass, I watched him fiddle with a bent wire, occasionally glancing my way. I tried to refocus on my work, but my gaze kept drifting to the window, heart pounding. 30 minutes passed. He was still there, pacing, fiddling. The occasional rasp of metal against car door handles scraped my nerves. Suddenly, he smacked the car roof in frustration and strode back toward my office. My pulse jolted. He cupped his hands around his eyes to peer through the glass, rapping on it with firm knocks. I picked up my phone, silently debating whether to call the police. He raised his voice. "Any chance you can help? I need a flashlight, or something." The overhead light cast his expression in harsh angles. His frustration had twisted into anger. It felt like a confrontation I couldn't escape. I dialed the security guard's number posted in the break room. A bored-sounding dispatcher assured me a patrol would swing by. Meanwhile, the man kept tapping on the glass, each tap more insistent than the last. I edged out of sight, hoping he'd think I wasn't there. But he knew I was. He'd seen me, only moments before. The knocking increased, turning into a series of harsh raps. I tried calling a coworker, but it went straight to voicemail. My mind spun with worry. Images of my child asleep at home with the babysitter, oblivious to my terror. Any illusions that I could handle this calmly were shattered by the man's next move. He yanked on the door handle and, finding it locked, rattled it fiercely. His voice cut through the glass. "Let me in. I know you're in there." My entire body stiffened. The plastic blinds rattled as he pressed his face closer to see if I was hiding behind the reception counter. Moments later, headlights swept across the parking lot. I dared to peek. A security SUV idled near the sedan. The man whipped around, hand still gripping the door. He shot a glare at the guard, stepped back as if weighing his options. Then, without warning, he sprinted behind the building, out of the headlight's range. Relief battered my senses. The guard tapped on the glass. I unlatched the door, carefully explaining what had happened. He walked around the perimeter with a flashlight, but the man was long gone. The guard assured me I was safe. Then, after lingering 10 minutes, left to continue his route. I should have packed up and gone home, but I convinced myself I still had time to finish just a bit more work. Besides, the guard had chased the man. Off, right? I returned to scanning documents, trying to keep my head clear. An hour crawled by. Then I heard a scraping sound by the back window. My thoughts froze, mid-sentence. There it was again. A rasping, metal-on-glass sound near the restroom. I shut off the lights, pulse hammering. Darkness wrapped the small office. In the gloom, I heard footsteps along the side alley. Low, muttered curses. I moved on instinct. I grabbed my purse, phone, and keys, tiptoeing toward the front entrance. If I could just slip out, get to my car first. My breath came in ragged gasps, every muscle tensed for a fight. Suddenly, the back door handle rattled, nearly failing to open only because of the deadbolt. Then the rattling grew furious. I heard him hiss a profanity. He was determined, not a mere stranded motorist, but someone with a reason to break in. I couldn't begin to imagine what that reason was, but my vision swam with the fear that I might be minutes from finding out. I inched the front door open, wincing at how the hinges whined. Slipping into the parking lot, I locked the door from the outside. I hurried to my car, scanning for any movement in the dimly lit sprawl of empty spaces. The sedan was gone. Then, as I dove into my driver's seat, a shape emerged from the corner of the building. Same man, shirt now untucked, holding a rusted crowbar. He must have heard me. Our eyes locked across 20 yards of cracked asphalt. He sprang into a sprint. I jammed my key into the ignition, palms slick. My engine coughed before turning over. He cut between parked cars, crowbar clutched in a white-knuckled grip. I stomped on the gas, ignoring the dreadful lurch of the car. My headlights caught a glimpse of him lunging, mouth twisted in fury. For a split second, I thought he'd smash my window. But the tires peeled away, and he shrank into the distance. I didn't stop driving until I reached a well-lit gas station 5 miles away. My hands wouldn't steady on the wheel. I fumbled with my phone to call the police again, explaining that the same man had returned, and this time with a weapon. They recommended I not go back to the strip mall until morning. I never returned to that job. I told my boss everything, left a rambling voicemail about how I refused to work the late shift alone. He never even bothered to call me back. Part of me still wonders who that man was and what he really intended. But more than anything, I'm grateful I escaped. Some nights, I dream of that crowbar and the sight of him racing toward my car. It's a memory I can't erase, a reminder that desperation doesn't always come from being locked out of your car. It can also come from looking out of a window and seeing true menace, baring its teeth at you in the dark. Story 4. The company always praised my work ethic, but the truth was I had more drive than sense. I'd log 12-hour days, then hit the road and power through the night to make the next appointment. Sleep could wait. Commissions could not. It was just after 10 p.m. when I left a tiny town, hoping to cover another 200 miles by morning. The highway unraveled in front of my headlights, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through farmland. Cornfields stretched into a moonlit haze on both sides. The usual monotony lulled me, and I found myself daydreaming of a hot shower and soft bed. Around midnight, I noticed headlights behind me, steadily matching my pace. I thought nothing of it at first, but after 30 minutes, I realized the car remained behind me, never passing, never dropping back. Occasionally, it fell a few car lengths away, only to close in again. I kept checking my mirror, each time feeling a subtle twinge of unease. I switched lanes to see if the driver would pass. The battered sedan behind me switched lanes too, maintaining a careful distance. I tried going faster. It matched my speed. My grip on the wheel tightened. I told myself it might just be a coincidence. A driver on the same route, maybe anxious about hitting a deer. Still, a jittery energy built in my chest every time I glanced in the mirror and saw those 2 orbs of light, unwavering. After another hour, my fatigue was overwhelming. I decided to pull into the next rest area for coffee. The sedan's headlights swung off the exit ramp right behind me. Inside the rest area lot, I parked near the bright entrance lights. My heart hammered as the sedan parked a few rows away. I waited, engine idling, to see if anyone would step out. No one did. The driver's silhouette stayed behind the tinted windows, motionless. A trucker roamed into the building, but otherwise the place was deserted. I mustered my courage and hurried inside, heading straight for the vending machines. My head buzzed with questions. Was I imagining danger where there was none? People pull over all the time for coffee. I paced near the entrance, sipping the bland coffee, eyeing the sedan through the glass doors. The shape behind the wheel was faintly visible. Someone tall, hunched forward. After a few minutes, my nerves won out. I stepped back outside, marched to my car, and drove off as swiftly as I could. I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on me. It didn't take long for the sedan to return to my rearview mirror. Relief and despair tangled in my mind. I'd hoped it would stay behind at the rest area. Instead, it latched onto me like a shadow. Fear strangled any desire to keep driving, so I took the next exit, praying it led to a place with life, a diner, a motel, anything. The sedan followed. My headlights cut through lonely rural roads. Every building seemed dark, closed for the night. Anxiety radiated from my fingertips, sweat collecting along my hairline. I tried to remain calm enough to find an open gas station, but the sedan was close now, tailgating with menacing proximity. It flashed its high beams for a few seconds, nearly blinding me, then switched them off. I spotted a flickering sign advertising 24-hour fuel. My heart soared with a glimmer of hope. I turned into the station's empty lot, the old pump island bathed in sickly yellow light. I pulled up to a pump, debating whether to step out or lock myself inside. The sedan cruised in behind me, rolling, to a stop at the far edge of the lot. I glanced around. No sign of a clerk. Maybe the station was partially automated after midnight. The sedan's engine idled. I swallowed hard, then slid out, forcing my shaky legs to move. I grabbed the gas nozzle, but my gaze kept flicking to the car behind me. The silhouette in the driver's seat never moved. I thought about calling 911, but in that moment, I doubted how a dispatch would handle my vague concerns. Someone's following me. What if the person was innocent? Suddenly the sedan revved. The tires squealed as it sped out of the station and disappeared onto the road. My legs sagged with confused relief. Was that the end of it? I finished fueling and tried to calm my breathing. Maybe I'd overreacted. People do weird things on the road. I got back in my car, determined to find a motel. I drove another mile, scanning for accommodations. That's when I saw those same headlights emerge from a side street behind me, cutting across the darkness to lock on my bumper once more. My composure frayed. I pressed the gas pedal, accelerating well over the speed limit. The sedan responded, its engine growling as it kept up. We soared past silent farmhouses and dead intersections. My mind was a war zone of panic. Should I pull over and confront them? Speed to the nearest police station? Then the road narrowed, only a single lane each way. Faint shapes of barns and trees flicked by. The sedan closed in, shining its high beams again, lighting my car interior in harsh white. I struggled to see the road. My tires kicked up dust from the shoulder as I tried to keep control. My limbs buzzed with adrenaline, but I found no safe place to stop in the darkness. Finally, a wooden sign announced a small town up ahead. I spotted a flicker of streetlights and turned onto the main road. The sedan lagged behind but still followed. My eyes darted for any open establishment. At last, I spied an all-night diner. Without signaling, I jerked the wheel into the parking lot. The sedan zoomed past, continuing down the main road, headlights diminishing. I collapsed against my seat, breath shaking. It was over, for now. My entire body felt wrung out. I sat in the lot, scanning the empty street. No sign of those headlights. A dull neon sign buzzed above the diner's entrance, promising coffee and pie. I forced myself inside. The waitress behind the counter welcomed me with a polite smile. She must have noticed I looked pale because she asked if I was all right. Tried to explain. She listened quietly, then glanced out the window as if expecting to see someone lurking there. "I get a county cop in here around 2, she said. "Why don't you wait until he comes by?" I nodded, sipping watery coffee, too jumpy to taste it. The minutes dragged. Each time a car's headlights swept by, my pulse kicked. None of them slowed down to turn into the lot. Eventually, a local police cruiser arrived. The officer, a graying man who looked half asleep, listened as I recounted the events. He escorted me out to my car, shining his flashlight around. Nothing enorme. The end. He offered to let me follow his cruiser to the next highway on-ramp, where I'd be safer. I accepted, feeling an odd shame at needing a police escort. But as we drove, comfort seeped in. His flashing lights ahead, guiding me. The sedan never reappeared. I found a motel near the interstate. When I finally collapsed into bed, I realized my muscles were still coiled tight. Part of me kept expecting to hear the roar of an engine in the parking lot, see headlights slicing through the curtains. Sleep came only in fragile snatches. To this day, I don't know who was driving that sedan, or why they fixated on me. I've replayed the possibility that maybe it was someone with bad intentions, or maybe just a disturbed individual who found cruel amusement in terrorizing a lone driver. Either way, those hours on the road felt like an endless chase. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between waking and sleeping, I recall the glare of those high beams in my rear view, a haunting reminder that safety on an empty highway can vanish as quickly as turning off your headlights. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more videos. Thank you for your support.